Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the COVID lockdowns didn't work. Heritage expert Hans von Spakovsky joins me to talk about forcing fair housing and vote fraud by mail, and ObamaGate unraveling, Flynn still waiting for justice, and finally, if we have time, national parks get some funding. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk, to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. There is ongoing debate, as you likely hear in states around the country, about the question of whether or not lockdown should happen again this fall. What if we have a resurgence? What if we have all these different things? Do lockdowns help? And there's some data I wanted to share with you because as you know, if you listen to my show very often, I am definitely in favor of keeping people safe. I'm in favor of making policy based on current data, not bad data that came to America's attention, the world's attention in early March, but actual data on the ground. And I'm in favor of preserving individual liberty and being very watchful against the idea of having government use any kind of excessive authority to force lockdowns, to shut down businesses if there is not sufficient justification. Big issue about shutdowns. So I want to just cover some quick things about that. So a professor in Denmark, Professor Christian Bjørnskov, Bjornskov, Bjørnskov of Aarhus University in Denmark, did a big study. His paper is called Did Lockdown Work? An Economist Cross-Country Comparison. He compared 24 European countries who've been dealing with COVID-19 and the first half of 2020 looked at mortality rates, used indices, policy measures, and weekly mortality rates, comparing 24 countries to come up with this conclusion. There is no association between lockdown policies and mortality development. To be more precise, he says, the findings of this paper suggest that more severe lockdown policies have not been associated with lower mortality. He gives a lot of data. This is available on our website, my website, and I have some listeners saying that I say the name too quickly, so I'll say it slowly. AmericaCanWeTalk.org. AmericaCanWeTalk.org. On the homepage, under show, drop down list of links. Study reported at Powerline, but the study, did lockdowns work? Evidence says no. Lots and lots of information, including even with respect to Sweden, which became such a controversy during this time. Present data show that the country experienced 161 fewer deaths per million in the first 10 weeks. This is speaking of Sweden. 464 more deaths in weeks 11 to 22. In total, Swedish mortality rates are 14% higher than in the preceding 3 years, which is slightly more than France, but considerably lower, considerably less mortality than Italy, Spain, the UK, that all implemented much stricter policies. Point number two on this, study within America, red states versus blue states. And again, this is on my website at AmericaCanWeTalk.org. You can find these articles. AmericaCanWeTalk.org. On the homepage shows drop-down list of links. Here are some quick findings comparing red states to blue states. And in case it's not clear, the relevance is red states tend to be states that respect individual liberty, that are less likely to have really strict lockdown rules and orders. Blue states, more liberal, big government-controlled economies and states, had far more restrictive, more lockdown, more limitation. The death rate per 1,000 cases in the 12 most conservative states has improved to the point that it is currently 5 times lower than the corresponding average rate in the 12 most progressive states. Big government policies shutting everything down did not result in improving the mortality rate. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. In the 12 most conservative states, the death rate per 1,000 cases 12 most conservative states, has improved to the point that it's currently 5 times lower than the corresponding rate in the 12 most progressive states. One more point to share. If you do not get this newsletter, I urge you to get it. Steve Moore, who's been on the show many times, he's part of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He's been sharing data, actual factual data about the COVID virus and the impact on our economy, our society. He's, of course, trying to urge, in the beginning, he was on the show many times talking about we have to formulate policy in Washington, not just based on medical input and the idea of the likelihood of spread and infection rates and all of that, but you have to weigh in policy with respect to the harm to the economy and the actual harm to people that can flow from shutdown orders that is not medical in nature. But he has a weekly email. It's really, really good. You can sign up for it. Go to committee to unleash prosperity.com and you can sign up for his weekly things. I'll tell you 3 quick things from his weekly email today. One is that the World Health Organization, the one organization that many leftists point to say, oh, they're the be all and end all, they're the answer, World Health Organization, sent out David Nabarro, a special envoy from World Health Organization, to make the point, what we at the WHO, World Health Organization, would invite countries is to do everything possible to not have these complete lockdowns. We think the Swedish approach has a lot going for it. Sweden, the one the leftists always try to point to as a disaster because they didn't lock down and they initially had more of a problem to start with. Now WHO is saying, hey, that was a pretty great idea. Do what Sweden did, because in the net has netted out. It has not been as much of a problem as other places. One other point coming from Steve Moore's weekly email from Unleash Prosperity. Dr. Pedro Alonso, also with the World Health Organization, he is the head of their malaria program. He says that the lockdowns in this world have spiked tuberculosis, HIV, and malaria deaths globally. The lockdowns are causing more deaths from tuberculosis, HIV, and malaria. So lots of data there. So for those people who say, well, you just got to follow the science. Okay, I'm in favor of that. Let's talk about this science too. I basically want to say that it's really, we become in this country, the whole dealing with coronavirus, COVID-19, it seems to be a Republican answer, a Democrat answer. I want there to be a freedom answer. I want there to be an answer that's rooted in facts, current data. I want there to be answers that are, as we've been talking about in the show many times, answers to the coronavirus and COVID-19 issue that allow doctors the rightful place, not just the doctors at high positions in the federal government who have not treated a patient in 25 or 30 years, doctors on the ground around the country who are reporting that they are finding successful treatment. They're engaged in successful treatment of COVID-19 patients using hydroxychloroquine and the related elements that go with that, using the inhaled budesonide, the inhaled steroid, using a nebulizer. Dr. Bartlett on this show has been talking about this. This is America, and we ought to have solutions to this challenge of the coronavirus that respect individual liberty, that curb liberty as little as possible, and answers that respect the right of individuals to pursue the care that they choose to pursue, rather than the government controlling access to hydroxychloroquine and other treatments. And we ought to have respect for the doctors in America on the ground treating patients who are trying to get the word out to America that they are finding successful solutions. America can handle this crisis. All the goodness and greatness of America needs to be put to the task of getting on top of this. And we have to be willing in this country to discontinue our resolute saluting to the NIH and federal government agencies that seem to be eye-rolling about any other solution other than freeze in place, stay at home, and wait until we have a vaccine. That's not good enough for America. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. Well, as I mentioned at the start of the show, we have Hans von Spakovsky joining us. He's joined us numerous times on the show. Love having him on. He is with the Heritage Foundation, as you likely know. And honestly, the Heritage Foundation, I'll make a small plug for them. Heritage Foundation is a great source of actually informed, researched, reasoned policies on a whole host of issues. And specifically, the reason I appreciate them so much is that their policy ideas are rooted in respecting the founding ideas of liberty, that the founding idea of America, of individual liberty. Heritage is dedicated to that. So they seek policy solutions consistent with the idea that we need to remain a country rooted in liberty. But specifically today, we have Hans von Spakovsky joining us. We are going to talk with him about mail-in ballots, and because mail-in ballots are all the trendy topic right now. We have, you know, people saying it's the be-all and end-all. Nancy Pelosi wants to make it what everybody has to do. And then we're also going to talk about a program, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, AFFH, or as I called it in my intro, it's actually forcing fair housing. We're going to talk about that with him first. That's become a bit of a campaign issue. Talk about both these things, but quickly to tell you about Hans von Spakovsky. He is manager of the think tanks of Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative. He is the co-author with John Fund of the book, Who's Counting? It's a great book, by the way. Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. That's for sure. Great book. I want to urge you to read that. Also, he has been working with the Justice Department as counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. A really brilliant career, immersed in understanding and policy and practice of law. So without further ado, I want to welcome Hans von Spakovsky. Hi there. Hi, Hans.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, it's nice to see you. That's right. Yeah, not just on the phone.
That's right. Yeah.
Good. Well, I want to hit on Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing first. Right. And I know this was an Obama-era initiative. 2015, I think he issued this. And, you know, the premise, as many leftist ideas is true of many ideas, they sound nice. Well, who could be against fair housing? So we had an initiative to try to affirmatively further, to push fair housing.
Right.
Before we get to what Ben Carson has done, tell us how it's supposed to work under President Obama and what his initiative was.
Right. Well, I'm sure folks know that every year Congress appropriates a very large amount of money to the Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And that money is given in grants to jurisdictions all over the country to basically provide low-income housing. It's often known as Section 8 housing. So what happens is towns and cities apply to HUD, and HUD gives them the money to develop, like I said, low-cost housing for people who are poor and can't afford it. Look, the only rule that should apply is the money going to be used by the town or city to build low-income housing? But that wasn't good enough for the Obama administration. Towards the end of it, they issued this gigantic regulation. You've named it, almost 400 pages, and it was basically intended to take over local zoning decisions. Because I think everybody understands, progressives hate the suburbs. They think everybody, no, it's true. They hate the suburbs.
I know.
They think everybody should live in high density housing. Nobody should have cars. Everybody should take mass transit. So what this regulation did was, instead of just simply looking at the issue of whether the town was going to use this money to increase the amount of apartments, for example, that people who are poor could afford, no. They were going to look at everything you have, from the quality of your schools to whether you have public transportation. And if you didn't meet their definition, then you are racially discriminating. So, for example, if you don't have a subway stop in your suburb, you would be considered probably to be engaging in racial discrimination. The whole intent of this was to basically override local zoning decisions made by local towns and cities. And fortunately, when the Obama administration came in, Ben Carson immediately suspended that regulation. And about 2 weeks ago, the president announced at a White House speech that he was giving on deregulation that they were, instead of issuing a revised regulation, they were just going to entirely suspend and get rid of the Obama regulation. And that's what Ben Carson and HUD have done. Best decision possible for the American public.
That was a great summary. And I want to back up and say it's a really interesting thing. I think that the title, as many titles do, the things leftists come up with, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, it sounds like a nice idea.
Right.
And so you think, well, yeah, let's make things fair. But the way it would have worked under President Obama's plan is that if local jurisdictions did not meet some requirement you're describing, don't have a subway stop, don't have adequate this or that the federal government could literally become the replacement for the local jurisdiction and make zoning decisions. Is that right?
Well, they couldn't make the local zoning decisions, but towns would not be able to get that federal funding. And a lot of towns and cities depend on that money. So basically, they would be able to, in essence, extort local communities to change the zoning, to switch to, for example, high density development in particular areas, and to make other changes, for example, in the school system that the federal government, that these progressives wanted in order to qualify for federal money. Otherwise, it would all get cut off.
Wow. Okay. So it was really just using the power of the purse. The federal government could say,
Yes.
you know, you don't like what we're doing, so we don't like what you're doing, so here's what's going to happen. And I'm sure for many jurisdictions, they rely on this federal funding.
That's
so
right.
they pretty much, they've just got to go along with the federal government is saying.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So I think it's interesting because I can tell you where we live in Dallas, Texas, there have been times where there was talk about a particular area, and these not the area we live in, but really nice, high-end, expensive home areas, where there was talk about putting in a high-density, low-income housing. And it's kind of funny because people I generally would describe as pretty liberal, as kind of more might have been amenable to these ideas in the abstract, when it meant, you mean like right across from our house or right near this? All of a sudden, the whole idea of this was, you know, it was made a reality to them, and there was a lot of pushback. Why can't we? It was always, can't we go somewhere else with it? Why does it have to be right here? I think it's one of those ideas, like many, maybe great on the drawing board, but in real life, it was very, very upsetting to people what
Right.
they pictured having happen. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just move on then and say, so this came when President Trump came in. I know Ben Carson, he went through some iterations, going to suspend it, going to re-examine it. I think you wrote a really good piece. I think it's available on our website at the time, just saying, don't just parse and nitpick, you know, don't
Right.
just do a little bit of adjustment. Well, let's just get it out of here. But it's been kind of interesting because I saw that among the things, I know that Heritage Foundation is non-political and nonpartisan, but there is some push by some people to say this is a signal or a sign that there is not sufficient concern with respect to the poor and housing needs, and to just for this administration just abandon the regulation entirely. But there are other ways that we use our federal funding dollars to help the poor that don't have that all existed before AFFH came along, that are still in place, right? We do other things to help with low-income housing.
Yeah, and look, there's no reduction in the amount of funding going out to local communities. It's just that this Obama era rule brought in all these extraneous factors that had nothing to do with providing low-income housing. Like I said, the only rule that HUD should look at is, are you, town, going to use this money to provide low-income housing? Are you going to build, for example, an apartment complex that people who are poor can afford? And if, in fact, that's what they're going to do with it, well, then they should get the money. It shouldn't be an issue of, well, yeah, you're going to create an apartment complex for low-income people, but because you don't have a subway stop there,
Yeah.
we're not going to give you the money. That's fundamentally unfair, and in fact, that would hurt the very people who are supposed to be benefited by this kind of a federal grant.
Yeah, it's a very interesting effort that was made under the Obama era. And it was actually interesting, I think it was 2015, very much near the end of his second term, that he went for this. But, you know, you started out by talking about how there are some people whose thinking is more, it has more of a sense of orchestrating and deciding things from the federal level. And I think there was
Right.
a lot of pushback, just the idea, why is this a federal government's job at all to be assessing to the degree they were trying to? Do you agree that was one factor that made this untenable, this AFFH was just
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the idea that in essence, you would have bureaucrats in HUD in Washington, D.C., deciding on, for example, what density of housing you should have in a little town, a small town somewhere in Texas that is applying for this money. And that makes no sense at all. I should mention, by the way, that while Ben Carson did suspend the Obama rule when he first came in, they had put out a proposed rule that it did radically reduce the restrictions, but it still incorporated some of them. And in essence, President Trump came out and said, that's not acceptable to me. We're just getting rid of it entirely.
He said none of the above, right?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting it's a political gamble too, because I know part of what the Democrat candidate for President Joe Biden has said is he's really talking about actively trying to use the power of the federal government to shift and make up the composition of suburbs. And I believe it was among the things he agreed with the Bernie Sanders campaign people to take up, because Bernie Sanders has been strong on this idea too of, is again kind of forcing the, as you say, liberals hate suburbs, but I mean forcing a reconstruction, a reconfiguring of all of America. And so do you know what is in the Biden plan, like what he would be doing with this issue?
Well, he's clearly come out against getting rid of the Obama era regulation, which he, of course, was also responsible for. So so he would bring back that regulation and ensure, like I said, federal bureaucrats having control over zoning decisions all over America.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know, Hans, if you and I talked about this, but my husband read a book about the creation, essentially, of the Great Society. And he said, this wasn't in the book, but the picture he got was of people, they're sitting in Washington. They realize we have a pile of money here because we collect so much in taxes. We do have income disparity and wealth disparities. And so kind of sitting around a table in the White House or in some agency and concocting the entire Great Society program, the entire, we're going to take this here and move it here. We're going to pass this law and spend this money and prohibit this and demand this, kind of these masters of the universe sitting in Washington. And he was describing how they were so, you could almost, if you're trying to be fair, almost think, well, they were well-intentioned. I mean, they thought, gee, this poverty disparity is not right. And, we can do something about it. But they got to where they're the meisters of the universe in Washington. And as many people have acknowledged, a great society, and all of the great initiatives that were a part of that pretty much just didn't change much in terms of the economic structure of America. I mean, it spent a lot of money. And I have that same sense about this. I'm just picturing these people sitting around at HUD thinking, I know what your community is like there in, whatever,
right,
small town America. And you just think that doesn't belong in Washington.
Well, I will tell you, look, I worked at two different federal agencies. And I will tell you that I was just shocked at the attitudes of so many of the career civil servants that I met at these agencies in Washington. They had the most patronizing, dismissive attitude towards local communities all over the country. Their view was, it was very arrogant. Their view was that they knew what was best for the American people in just all kinds of areas. And like I said, they had a very patronizing, dismissive attitude towards the American public. And I encountered that on many occasions in the federal bureaucracy.
Oh, I can totally imagine that. And I know it isn't exactly draining the swamp, but it's like draining that swamp attitude, I think, is part of what President Trump is trying to move forward, that we actually trust the American people. We trust the local officials. Their communities chose them to be in the zoning commission or to be in the city council, and we're going to trust them. And I think that's more akin to the American spirit of self-governance, than for sure. Okay. Well, so back to this. So right now I want to clarify or confirm one thing you said. So even though the president has said we are not going to move forward any further, we're pulling back entirely the Obama era AFFH regulation from 2015, we're not cutting spending to help with low income housing.
Correct. So
we're still offering community block grants, other ways that communities, so they can still do what they want, except they're in control instead of the bureaucrats in Washington.
That right? You've summarized it exactly right.
Okay, so what are people complaining about? No, that's not really my question. Okay, so I do want to talk, though, also about mail-in balloting, which has become such a hot issue these days.
Right.
I mentioned, I think, in the start of the show, Nancy Pelosi has been talking about we got to have all mail-in balloting. And I know we've been through this before, but Hans, I want to go to a really basic question for people who say, hey, some states, and I don't remember what state it is, maybe more than one, that have had all mail-in balloting or largely majority mail-in balloting for a long time, and it seems to be okay. What is the reason to doubt the fairness and accuracy of mail-in ballots?
There are 5 states that have all mail elections, and what that means is they you can't vote in person. They simply mail a ballot to every registered voter. Well, there's numerous problems with that. First of all, if your voter registration list isn't completely accurate, you're sending out ballots to people who are no longer on the list. And to give you an example of what that means, I have a colleague at the Heritage Foundation who grew up in Washington State. Washington State is one of the states with all mail elections. She hasn't lived there in 8 years. Her sister hasn't lived there in 10 years. Yet every election, her parents say ballots arrive in the mail from state election officials for the 2 of them because the state thinks they're still living there and eligible voters. They could easily vote those ballots, and the state would never know that 2 people who don't live in the state have voted in the election. And that demonstrates the problem with all mail elections and the fact that if you don't keep up your voter list, you're going to have problems. The second big issue, though, is anybody who thinks the Postal Service can handle that effectively, I suggest you quickly Google and look at all the stories that have come out about the Wisconsin primary, the District of Columbia primary, the Maryland primary, and the New York recent primaries. In every single state, they have had numerous problems of absentee ballots that were sent out to voters not being delivered by the Postal Service to voters, or when voters actually have gotten them and sent them back, not being delivered in time. And the rejection rate for mail-in ballots is much higher than that for ballots that are cast in a polling place because it's more complicated to vote by mail. There's all this information you have to provide when you send back your ballot. And if you're missing any of that, your ballot's not going to get counted. So the more we vote by mail, the higher the disenfranchisement rate of voters.
Okay, I'm taking notes. I actually had one story, and you alluded to many of them, and this one I included. So the New York primary was actually on June 23rd.
Right.
June 23rd, and just this week, a judge had to, or a federal judge or election officials, to count thousands of ballots, mail-in ballots that didn't get counted because the post office didn't postmark them, didn't date stamp them.
That's right.
And so the voter, no fault of the voter. But
no,
and
that's a continuing problem. And Wisconsin had exactly the same problem. They had their primary on April 7th. The Inspector General for the Postal Service recently issued a report, and one of the things that he found was that hundreds of ballots were not counted because the Postal Service did not postmark them, so election officials had no idea if they had been mailed prior to the end of Election Day. Also, as you mentioned, June 23rd for the New York primary, they only, in the last day or two, finished counting the ballots. It's taken them 6 weeks, and 2 of the races, congressional races, it's still disputed who won. 1 in 5 ballots was rejected by election officials. That's 20% of the votes. That's an enormous number.
it sure is. Okay, you mentioned that the states often don't keep up accurate, up-to-date lists,
Right.
which is probably an enormous task. I mean, it's a personnel problem, an expenditure problem to even do that. Second, counting on the post office. I'll just leave it at that. But there's also potential, and Nevada just passed a new bill, which I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you, actually, I'm sure you know on what basis it can be challenged, but Nevada just passed kind of in the dark of night and a mail-in ballot thing, which sounds like it's just a playground for fraud. So can you tell about that Nevada bill?
Yeah, Nevada has said they're going to switch to an all-mail election. They're going to mail everyone a ballot. That is going to cause chaos and confusion. One, because they don't have an accurate voter list. So thousands of ballots are going to pile up in neighborhoods, in apartment buildings for people who don't even live there anymore. But look, here's the other problem. The states that have all-mail elections, like Washington, Oregon, it literally, Debbie, took them years to put in place the resources and structure to be able to handle that many all-mail ballots. No state like Nevada that doesn't have that now, there's no way they can get that done in the next 3 months.
Okay, we haven't really gone into the whole episode, and I know you and I talked about in the past, but I use the expression playground for fraud, but your colleagues at the Heritage Foundation who haven't lived in whatever state it was, Washington, for so long, and they still get ballots in the mail. Well, people can be aware of those things. People who intend to commit vote fraud, they can realize, hey, neighbor Susie over here, she moved away and the house is empty, but I'm going to grab that ballot. So people can be fully aware that mail-in ballots are coming in to people who aren't going to even know they're there, vote them. And it's really almost impossible, I assume, for the state to figure out if the ballot was filled out by the person who was whose ballot it was.
Well, the only check they have on that is a signature comparison. But when you're receiving literally millions of ballots in the mail, how much time do you think the election clerks spend comparing the signature on the absentee ballot with the signature on file? The average amount of time they have is 3 seconds. 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
3 seconds to make a decision. So yeah, maybe in many cases, hopefully they'll catch that the signature doesn't match. But there's probably plenty of instances where it's just a scrawl, and they're just not going to know that somebody else has signed it. Plus, Debbie, keep this in mind. Remember 2018, the one contested congressional race in the country was North Carolina 9. The election there was overturned because of absentee ballot fraud and illegal vote harvesting. A political consultant and his staff were going to people's homes and collecting their absentee ballots, and in some cases filling out the ballots, and in other cases forging the voter's signature. This man, who had worked in the state for years, had prior absentee ballot request forms that he had photocopied from voters, so he had their signatures. So he had the ability to easily forge signatures, which is one of the reasons why allowing vote harvesting is a very bad idea.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the vote harvesting thing all by itself is just it's just playground for fraud. The last thing I was going to mention, and again, it relates to the post office, but not just failing to put a date stamp on, but just say Nancy Pelosi could magically wave a wand and everyone has to follow what she wants, which is all mail-in ballots. You could end up literally with however many people vote in every election cycle. You're going to have that number of people adding the burden to our post office system, which frankly is nothing to write home about in terms of efficiency on a good day and a good year. But all of a sudden between now, whenever early voting starts, I guess some states start as early as September, start next month. Right. And you have through November, millions and millions of new pieces of mail. And that just seems staggering. It seems impossible to have an efficient election that way.
No. In fact, Debbie, remember in the 2016 election, about 130 million votes were cast for the two presidential candidates. If we switch to all mail elections in every state, that would mean the Postal Service would have to handle in September and October an extra 260 million pieces of mail, both the envelope from election officials going to voters and the envelope with the completed ballot from voters going back to election officials. Is there anybody out there who really thinks the Postal Service can efficiently and effectively handle 260 million pieces of extra mail?
Clearly not. Right?
No.
Or if someone does think that, I have some oceanfront property for you in Kansas. Yeah, right. It is amazing. Okay, one other thing I was going to say about this, I want to get to why we should even be talking about all mail-in ballots, but one other point is, for an individual citizen, if you care about voting, and many, many people do, you shouldn't want to run the risk of casting your vote
That's right.
by mail. You should want to be the one saying, no, I want in person because I want to be sure I'm showing up and I'm voting. I mean, it should be the voters saying no.
Yeah, and you're putting your ballot in the ballot box so you know it was delivered. And look, for folks who are worried about this, let me mention two things. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, just put out guidelines for election officials on how to safely conduct in-person elections. And it's putting in all the same kind of health safety protocols we're all seeing at the grocery store. Line spacing for the voters, wearing a mask, use of disposable pens to mark ballots, etc. CDC also just issued a report saying that when Wisconsin held its primary on April 7th, and several 100,000 people went to vote in person, there was no spike in COVID-19 infections.
Oh, you know what? I missed that. I'm glad to hear that because that was one of the big objections to why can't Wisconsin everyone's going to get sick. Well, that's great to know. Well, I'll tell you, on this COVID-19 stuff, I think if you truly had a complete shutdown in America and nobody left the room and nobody left home, then you could see people, if we thought that was necessary based on all the factors relating to this disease, then you might have more of an argument that in the fall we have to really think all this through. But we've had riots, protests, we've had thousands in the streets. We've had states opening up at varying levels. I mean, some states far more open than other states. We have not been frozen. And the idea that we can riot together, we can go to the grocery store together, we can vote together. There's not a compelling reason to engage in this full-on mail-in balloting. Or at least that's my read.
I think I totally agree with you, and I'll leave you with this thought. Look, right when I was talking to a reporter last week about the unreliability of the Postal Service, my neighbor knocked on the door to give to me a piece of mail that he had received from down the street. And then the second thing is, look, if you won the Powerball lottery, would you put your ticket in the mail to the lottery board, or would you want to take it down there yourself? I don't think there's anybody out there who would trust the mail service to do that.
Amen to that. Hans von Spakovsky, it is always great to talk with you. Thank you for being available today. Thank you for joining me on American
Sure thing.
Talk.
Anytime.
Great talking to you, sir, and have a great vacation.
Thank you. You too.
So I'll tell you, folks, this is a very interesting time because I think that some people think they're kind of standing up for fairness, for fair elections, for protecting people by supporting this mail-in ballot stuff, and we've got to stand strong against it. I know in the great state of Texas, we've had our own attorney general be really strong about saying we don't need to do this, but there is an effort, especially among some leftists, saying, this is what we're going to do, and we've got to be able, we ourselves should be comfortable saying, no, we don't need it, we don't want it, and we don't want to risk our own votes. We Americans who want our votes to count, we don't want to risk our own votes. So thank you so much to Hans. I'm so glad he could join us. Okay, I'm going to turn to two last stories today. And Matt, the wonderful, I want to thank him and Real News PR again for making it possible for me to do my show while we're traveling. I'll tell you that this is my last show for this week, and we're taking 1 week off. Next week, we're going to enjoy visiting our family here and then be back on track on, I think it's Monday, August 17th. Be back in the studio in Dallas, ready to roll through the election day. But I'll be gone for a week. So what I want to hit last couple quick stories, one about ObamaGate, and I want to start calling, there've been so many names floated around, whether you're going to call it, Russiagate or, Russia collusion hoax, Russia-Trump collusion hoax, or Dossier-gate, or all that kind of stuff. We need to start calling it ObamaGate, because at the end of the day, it's very clear that at the very minimum, President Obama was completely, fully, absolutely aware of what the DOJ and FBI were doing in terms of intentionally undermining candidate Trump and then President Trump in terms of concocting false allegations against him, cooking up, really setting up some of the Trump officials for later to be charged with things completely unjustified. And I want to just talk about two things that are happening. One is yesterday there was testimony in the United States Senate. Sally Yates was testifying, And again, the term that's used, or the expression that the FBI came up with, they were calling this Operation Hurricane. And I think that there's an important point to be made about Sally Yates and her testimony. It was testy. You know, she's the one, Sally Yates is the one who she stepped up as a acting attorney general right after Trump came into office, and very quickly was let go by him because she would not provide a defense. She would not, as her job was as acting attorney general, would not provide a defense for the Trump orders. When President Trump came into office and he issued executive orders relating to immigration and relating to be trying to protect America from having terrorists brought to America not adequately vetted. And so she wouldn't follow his orders. She wouldn't defend his orders. So he let her go early. She's not happy with him, but she was involved and inside the FBI as her as the former deputy U.S. Attorney General, and she testified yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee about the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane. And, you know, they always have these great names they think up, Crossfire Hurricane, and that was the code name that the FBI gave to the counterintelligence investigation in 2016 and 2017. Not a lot came out of her testimony, except she's all trying to say, she's basically saying, I didn't do anything wrong with everybody else, throws Comey under the bus a little bit, but at least is an effort, and I'm thrilled to see it, an effort in the United States Senate by the Republican majority, slim as it is, but the Republican majority to continue to go after what happened inside the FBI and the DOJ, to insist that justice is going to occur, to insist on getting to the bottom of it. And I also want to mention that there was a wonderful interview with Sidney Powell, and she's, of course, the attorney, been on this show many times, but the attorney for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. And her commentary, she was asked, well, what would you ask Sally Yates? What if you were there? What would you have asked her? And she makes the point that the effort of Sally Yates and others to go after Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and to continue to harass him, she's really kind of strong on the idea of just, this lady needs to be held accountable. She needs to be held accountable. The people in the DOJ, she points out that when the first two investigators, the FBI, went and met with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, questioned him, they both went back to the DOJ. They both talked to Sally Yates, and they both told her, I think he's telling the truth. I don't think he was hiding anything. I think he was completely forthcoming. So she's hearing this report of the people who actually talked to Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and, you know, did not act in a bold way and to protect the integrity of what was occurring, but instead was among the team very, very quickly urging President Trump to fire Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, even though she'd just been told that the investigators who talked to him found him to be credible in every way. I think it's important to understand these things because there is a wide cast of characters inside the DOJ and FBI who've not yet really been held accountable. Stories float around. The only people obviously ever being held accountable so far are people who were supposedly on the Trump team and had very minor roles, but were somehow they were targeted by the FBI. You had Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and of course, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. On Flynn in particular, I want to focus on him just to say we haven't talked about this issue. It seems like in weeks because it wrapped up in Black Lives Matter and Antifa and, of course, COVID-19 and hydroxychloroquine. So we've kind of left, but all of this is still happening in Washington. All of this effort by people in the Senate to get to the bottom of things, to try to hold hearings, to demand answers, still ongoing is the prosecution, because it hasn't yet been dismissed, the prosecution of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. This is a guy, who was arm twisted using the Mueller perjury trap technique used on many people, kind of twisted into pleading guilty, and then fortunately retaining the services of Sidney Powell, who was able to bring about through persistent efforts what she filed, what she insisted on, and then finally having Attorney General Barr appoint a special U.S. attorney. And this is really the turning point in the case with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, is Barr appointed a special U.S. attorney, Jeff Jensen, to get in there and look at the documents that the FBI and DOJ had failed to turn over in the prosecution of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. These are serious, serious things, serious wrongdoing that the DOJ and FBI engaged in. The Brady rule that basically says when someone's being criminally prosecuted, you, the prosecutor, you must turn over every bit of exculpatory evidence, exculpatory meaning tending to imply the person is not guilty, tending toward helping them with a defense, tending in any way to help the person who's defending themselves against the government. And so the only reason we're here today, where we've had the DOJ move to dismiss all charges against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, is because Attorney General Barr appointed this Jeff Jensen guy to come in and look through documents in the Department of Justice and see, did we turn over everything? Did the DOJ? Because Sidney Powell, as Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's new attorney, very persistent, very informed, very aware of the intricacies inside what happens, how things work inside the Department of Justice. She knew that the DOJ had not complied with the Brady rule, had not turned over everything they needed to turn over. And through her many motions and insistence, finally, Barr assigns Jensen. Jensen looks through documents and says, you've got to be kidding me. All of these have been sitting here at the DOJ and you didn't turn them over. And once those were turned over, they were essentially completely exculpatory of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. They were actually documents showing that not only was he not guilty of what he was charged with, but that the entire effort to prosecute him was a political attack on him. Notes on the documents turned over that are basically acknowledging they were setting him up. They were contemplating, how should we do this? What can we do? Are we doing this to trap him? Are we doing this to force him into pleading guilty? I mean, it was a monstrous set of facts. The DOJ was finally exposed of what happened inside the DOJ. That gets returned over, and finally, so we're at the place today where the DOJ filed a motion in the federal court case against Flynn with Judge Emmett Sullivan, basically saying, dear Your Honor, please dismiss all charges, and acknowledge in their pleading this was completely unjustified, unwarranted. The prosecution was unwarranted, must be dropped, and you cannot get Emmett Sullivan to drop the case. And I'm raising all this to say that I'm so impressed with and so grateful for Sidney Powell, because she's staying right on it. Where it stands right now is the 3-judge panel. So Sidney Powell, files a writ of mandamus to the appellate court. She says, you guys have got to tell Emmett Sullivan to drop this case. The 3-judge panel, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, they order the writ of mandamus. They say, which are very rare, ordered the judge, you have to dismiss this case. You can't just refuse to dismiss it because you're a Democrat or because you don't like Flynn or for any other reason you have. You are not a prosecutor, you're a judge, this is your role. So still, Emmett Sullivan not conducting himself in any way consistently with his duty as a federal district court judge, he still won't dismiss the case. He files to have the entire appellate court, the entire DC Circuit Court of Appeals, hear the case en banc. So that's where we sit today, where that hearing is August 11th. And so then, of course, after the hearing, then there's going to be some time period where the judges have to all talk to each other and decide what they're going to do and issue their order. It seems clear to many people because many in the justice system, especially leftists appointed by Obama, Clinton, or other leftists, simply will not follow the law. They just won't follow the law. So you have these judges, the majority on the Circuit Court of Appeals, are clearly, people assume they're going to let Judge Emmett Sullivan go forward with the next concocted, unjustified, illegal, unwarranted, unmitigated, disastrous effort he is trying to do, which is basically to say, even though I'm not the prosecutor, even though the prosecutor told me to drop the charges, I want to sit around, fiddle around the federal district court bench a while longer and think up reasons I can maybe not dismiss this case. Everyone assumes that the DC Circuit Court of Appeals will do. Everyone assumes then that's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. And now when we have a rogue Supreme Court where you have Chief Justice Roberts inexplicably voting with the left time after time, unjustified by the law, voting with the leftists, it's a real pickle because all this time, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn did not engage in anything that is anything like what the charges supposedly were, which were, the idea that the very start of all this, which was that, there had been some Trump-Russia collusion and somehow Flynn was, enabling it or tolerating it or engaged in it in some way. Never happened. And still he sits not yet dismissed as a criminal defendant, still sits convicted or having pled guilty, still awaiting sentencing. So it's a very, very tough thing right now. And it's time for people to just demand justice out of our system. And so we'll wait to hear what happens on August 11th. But there is a vital need to understand this isn't just about Flynn. It's not about how smart Sidney Powell is. It's about whether you have a justice system that will actually enforce law against high-ranking officials in this country. Because what's coming down the pike, apparently, and hopefully, and I actually think is coming down the pike, is Attorney General Barr and John Durham are going to release whatever the results are of their investigation. They're going to end up seeking indictments against some people, very high-ranking officials in the FBI and Department of Justice. We're going to be talking about criminal prosecution of former very high officials in our country. Very rarely happens, as you well know. But if we don't do that, if we say, let's just let it go because this is too ugly, we don't want to become a country that, engages in prosecution of our high elected officials, we can't do that. You end up with a banana republic, third world, no rule of law country, and we can't let America come to that. We cannot. One last, and this is a 2-second story just to mention that President Trump signed a bill funding the upkeep and protection, beautifying of the national parks. And this is a closing out this week's shows with a positive story. This is a bipartisan effort to spend a bunch of money, federal tax dollars, to fix the national parks. The best vacation places most families ever get to go to are the national parks. I'm sure you and others have been there. You've been there as a child. You've taken your own children. Great thing to have the money spent on something so good. A kind of a great, at the end of summer, America thing. Maybe it's something we want to take for your kids this summer. But I think, closing out the show for just this 1 week, and I'll be gone for a week, this is an extremely important time in American history. You have the forces on the left, from the Marxists working to destroy inner cities, the Marxists determined to make radical change in America, to corrupt the basic founding ideas of America, radicals determined to uproot America from its roots in liberty and turn us into a very government-controlled, unfree society. This is what's on the ballot in 2020. This is what we are looking at. The two sides are clearly defined. You have the radical left that has taken over the Democrat Party, where not one Democrat can denounce Marxism, socialism, communism, Antifa, any of it, then they're in bed with them. That's where we are right now. You have that side, or the side that is trying to stand up for the America of the founding. That is what we faced in the elections in 2020. And I like to do at the close of every show is tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started today talking about the COVID lockdown, COVID lockdowns don't work. Extensive study of European countries by Denmark's Professor Bjørn Skov, varying responses to COVID-19 found no correlation between lockdowns and mortality rates. Extensive study of 12 red states and 12 progressive blue states, responses to COVID-19. Death rates per 1,000 cases were 5 times lower in red states, with minimal lockdowns, maximum freedom. Highest death rates per 1,000 cases in New Jersey and New York, much lower in Florida and Texas. Even the World Health Organization envoy is now speaking against continued lockdowns. One praising Sweden's no lockdown approach, another noting the lockdowns associated with spike in deaths from TB, HIV, and malaria. The science, for people who want the science, lockdowns are unwarranted, ineffective. HCQ is effective. Continued lockdowns are purely political. They're not about public health. And on ObamaGate unraveling while Flynn is waiting, and why it matters to you. Saturday 8 Senate testimony, mostly skilled evasion, blaming FBI, protecting DOJ, unchanged reality. Yates knew FBI agents considered Flynn truthful, yet Yates pressed for Flynn's termination from Trump White House. Yates supported the coup attempt. Most important, unchanged reality. ObamaGate represents the most corrupt, most outrageous abuse of power in the history of the USA, but accountability has not yet been imposed. Trump says, and Trump did say this, I forgot to mention, breathtaking findings about to be released in this story about the ObamaGate. And 2020 election will make way for full accountability if Republicans win. But please know it'll be swept under the rug if the D's win. General Flynn deserves to reclaim his time and his life. America's survival and restoration may depend on accountability for ObamaGate. There is no way to call it a justice system if this treason goes unpunished. And finally, national parks funding, just great to say. America's national parks are a national treasure for all citizens and tourists. Few experiences are more inspiring and refreshing than a visit to the national parks. Rare bipartisan legislative action and a good use of tax dollars, major funding supply for upgrading and addressing deferred maintenance at America's national parks. Before summer ends, visit a national park. One last thing I'll tell you as I close out for this week. If you love this show, if you love listening, which I so appreciate all the amazing emails and notes and comments I get, thank you for, I appreciate every wonderful and note you send me. First of all, I have a weekly email. Go to my website, americacanwetalk.org, and on the homepage, click on subscribe. I will sign you up for my once weekly email. It comes out at the end of every show week, and I tell you the links, send you links to everything I've talked about, the interviews, the articles you've written. And also on that homepage, America Can We Talk, if you like and appreciate what you're learning, please consider supporting this show. This show is funded entirely by listeners. And if you like what you're learning, I can't tell you how much I'd appreciate your support in keeping the show going. On the homepage at America Can We Talk, click on the donate button. You can click on one-time or recurring donation, and every donation helps us keep this show going strong, helps me overcome the social media censors who are attacking this show, and allows me to spread the word more and more about the just extraordinary importance of defending this unique, amazing gift of God, of freedom for people, the idea of America. I'm Debbie Georgatos. This is America Can We Talk. Thank you for listening. Please tune in when I'm back on Monday, August 17th, and every Monday through Thursday thereafter at 3 p.m. Central Time. Please tune in to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you hear?